This week on Government Matters.
You catch little problems, there are no big Bernie Madoff problems. You catch little problems, there are no end runs.
Financial transparency through data could help government root out fraud, waste, and abuse.
They've developed enough data they can now make it a science. So they're going to start having stringent requirements for anyone who wants to be insured.
The evolution of cyber insurance. It's just one security prediction for 2016.
These are historic events that captured America's attention, but it also, along with the world, transforms the way government manages itself.
We look back on 50 years of federal times. Government Matters starts right now.
From ABC 7 and News Channel 8, this is Government Matters.
To our viewers around the world on the American Forces Network and here in the nation's capital, thanks for joining us. Government is the engine that runs this city. That's why Government Matters. Every week we'll bring you the top headlines in tech, security, and management. I'm your host, Morris Jones. After 3 years of study and debate, Defense Secretary Ash Carter has opened all military jobs to women. The landmark decision serves as formal recognition that thousands of women served honorably during 14 years of war in Iraq and Afghanistan. Meanwhile, the U.S. will stay involved in those countries. Just this week, Carter told Congress he's sending special forces back to Iraq. Jim Sciutto has more.
After frequent White House denials that U.S. troops would face combat in Iraq and Syria, the president is ordering dozens of U.S. special forces into combat roles involving direct action against ISIS.
These special operators will, over time, be able to conduct raids, free hostages, gather intelligence, and capture ISIL leaders.
The new expeditionary force will number in the dozens, though support forces will expand its total footprint to about 200.
This force and the operations this force will conduct will provide us additional intelligence that will make our operations much more effective.
Part of their mission, raids like this one in northern Iraq in October. A daring joint operation involving Kurdish commandos and the U.S. Army's Delta Force to free these ISIS-held prisoners. Demonstrating the added danger of direct action, one Delta Force operator, Master Sergeant Joshua Wheeler, was killed. This new deployment to Iraq is in addition to the 50 special forces the U.S. is already deploying on the ground in Syria.
It puts everybody on notice in Syria that you don't know at night who's going to be coming in the window. And that's the sensation that we want all of ISIL's leadership and followers to have. So it's an important capability.
The expanded U.S. combat role comes in the aftermath of Paris, and as progress against ISIS on the battlefield has been halting. Though President Obama declared the group contained in an interview 2 weeks ago.
From the start, our goal has been first to contain, and we have contained them.
The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dunford, appeared to contradict his commander-in-chief.
Have we currently contained ISIL?
We have not contained ISIL.
Have they been contained at any time since 2010?
Tactically, in areas they have been. Strategically, they have spread since 2010.
Jim Sciutto reporting. An update now on the Financial Transparency Act of 2015. A group of about 30 lawmakers want major U.S. financial regulatory agencies to adopt consistent data standards. It could help government eliminate fraud, waste, and abuse. The Transparency Caucus held their third meeting this week in Washington, and our Diane Cho was there.
It is not an exaggeration to say that data in the financial world is a total mess.
On Capitol Hill, Representatives Darrell Issa and Mike Quigley held a Congressional Transparency Caucus briefing to discuss modernizing financial regulation reporting.
If you have better open data, more data that's able to be connected and analyzed quickly, both by regulators, but also by people on the outside, by watchdogs, you're going to solve those problems and catch those problems before they become huge sort of drags on our economy and huge scandals.
Spotlighting the Financial Transparency Act, a proposal introduced earlier this year.
Information collected from publicly traded companies, banks, and other financial institutions by most regulators are still treated as static documents, either posted online as a PDF or in another unsearchable format. PDFs are nice because they look the same on your computer screen as they do printed out, but they lock valuable data away from the user, making large-scale data analysis nearly impossible.
The bill would require the major financial regulators such as the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Commodity Futures Trading Commission to adopt consistent data standards for the information they already collect. If passed, it would also mandate the adoption of legal entity identifiers, or LEIs.
Without the LEIs, without these identifiers for legal entities, you don't actually know what data is about which entity in a global sense. And so you have different types of data sets that cannot be linked together, and so you're losing the value of, and you're losing these opportunities.
If everybody used the LEI, there would be no ambiguity over who the counterparties were, and it would speed up and reduce the cost of clearing and settlement.
Matt Rumsey with the Sunlight Foundation says using an LEI or any universal identifier is valuable across the board.
If you have a good LEI or a good identifier, you're going to be able to track terrorist financing much easier. You're going to be able to track contractor fraud.
For Government Matters, I'm Diane Cho.
Let's turn from data transparency to data privacy. This week, Sean Donovan, director of the Office of Management and Budget, said it's time to stop reinventing the wheel. He wants to create a federal privacy council so individual agencies can share information in order to craft better privacy policies government-wide. For more, I'm joined by Greg Otto, technology editor for FedScoop. Greg, let's get a quick state of the state. The government collects a huge amount of data from American citizens, largely at the agency level. Generally speaking, how do those agencies safeguard privacy? What kind of rules govern the personally identifiable information?
Well, the rules come from different policies and directives from across the government. There is directives from OMB, specifically a circular A130. There is a memorandum, I believe it's 17-06, that dictates how agencies are to handle PII, as well as FSMA regulations. FSMA is updated every 2 years, and the Office of Management and Budget just put out how their guidance will look for FSMA in 2016. That is a very key document into how agencies deal with PII.
All right, now enter Sean Donovan. He wants to model this Federal Privacy Council after the CIO Council. Tell us more.
So there is going to be a new council called the Federal Privacy Council. Currently, there is a privacy committee on the CIO Council, but now this is going to be moved into something a little bit more formal. Mark Groman, who is the senior privacy advisor for OMB, is going to lead this effort. And into 2016, you're going to see a lot of chief privacy officers from around different agencies come together and sort of codify and modernize how agencies are going to be dealing with privacy regulation moving forward.
Greg, for many agency CIOs, privacy policy is part of the job. What about overlap?
So there is going to be some overlap. There is some overlap right now because privacy officers do work with CIOs. But with the A130 revisions that are going on right now, there is an effort to streamline security and privacy. So when I talked to Groman earlier this week, he talked about how privacy should be enabling technology moving forward. That's something that CIOs are going to like once they see this sort of roll out. Anything that makes a CIO jobs easier is going to be welcomed.
Donovan rolled this out at the Federal Privacy Summit. You write he also appealed for federal privacy policies to be backed up with cash. What does that mean?
I don't think so much that the cash is the big thing. I think that the resources are a really big thing. It reminds me of what Tony Scott has been saying in relationship to the cybersecurity workforce, that he's trying to get cybersecurity workforce modernized and get fresh young minds in to protect agency assets. That's what Groman wants to do with privacy experts, bring in fresh young thinking to privacy policies, and I think that is going to take place and take hold with this Privacy Council that's going to come next year.
I'm curious, Greg, what prompted this initiative? Did OMB give any indication?
I think there was some indication. There was nothing that really stuck out, but I think that A130 revision that I mentioned earlier, the streamlining of the privacy and security was really a big deal when we wrote about it in June. So it's not surprising to see that they are trying to move it to a more modern stance within the federal government.
All right, Greg Otto, technology editor for FedScoop. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you.
Let's take a look now at the rest of this week's agency headlines. The Office of Personnel Management announced a new verification center this week. Now victims of last summer's OPM data breach can go online to a safe website and determine their status. The site is opm.gov/cybersecurity. The Inspector General for the General Services Administration has submitted her semi-annual report to Congress this week. It found a series of IT vulnerabilities. The report also says more than $1.3 billion in funding could be used more effectively. By a wide margin, the Senate has confirmed Gail Smith to be the 17th Administrator of USAID. She's a former journalist, Africa expert, and founder of the Enough Project, a nonprofit seeking to end genocide. Smith succeeds Rajiv Shah. We'll turn from tech to security straight ahead on Government Matters. The internet can be a dangerous place marked by data breaches, ransomware, or denial of service attacks. We track the trend lines for security in 2016 next. In Security Matters, cybersecurity predictions for 2016. This week, Raytheon Websense published an eye-opening report. It tracks the evolution of internet-based vulnerabilities to offer a clear view of where hackers are headed. For more, I'm joined by Bob Hansmann, Director of Product Security for Raytheon Websense. Bob, we have a lot of ground to cover. Let's get right to it. According to your report, attackers see large events as an opportunity to launch cyber attacks on a curious population. You identify elections as fertile ground for these types of attacks. Tell us more.
Well, death, drama, and disaster have always been the big themes for social engineering of attacks, and the U.S. elections this year are full of all of that. So we've got lots of themes that they'll use to attack both the voters themselves with defrauding attacks, trying to gather information such as, will you donate to this fake fund, to maybe even disparaging different candidates and therefore causing confusion in the election itself.
Very interesting, but it all sounds plausible. Let's move on to payment security. The U.S. financial sector introduced chip and PIN technology this year. That will help, but what about vulnerabilities to so-called mobile wallets?
Well, in addition to the mobile wallet, the device is actually carrying a lot of things, including apps. Instead of just going in and getting your membership card to enable you to take advantage of discounts, they now want to track you when you're in the store. Your phone can not only make the payment, but inform them where you're going in the store, what other stores you may have visited. And so this personal information simply is more that the bad guys could steal from those vendors.
There's also a new acronym that will dramatically impact cybersecurity in 2016. It's called GLDT, or Generic Top-Level Domains. Explain that term for us.
Well, we've been living with .gov, .net, and .com for a long time.
Right.
And we've run out of the really good names. Try to find a name for your own site on the internet, and it's pretty tough.
You're right.
So now they have .family, they have .hobby, and there's over 700 that have been introduced recently.
Wow.
And over 1,900 coming in the coming year. What this means is new URL opportunities. But the people taking advantage of it at the moment, a lot of them are the cyber criminals. They're the first ones to enter into and take advantage of these bleeding edge technologies.
Wow. Your report also covers the Internet of Things, data theft prevention, and the impact of legacy systems. But I want to touch on cyber insurance. This is a very new field. Where will it head in 2016?
Well, cyber insurance has been kind of like gambling, and that's what they do. They make a bet on whether or not you're going to be attacked or not. But they've developed enough data, they can now make it a science. So they're going to start having stringent requirements for anyone who wants to be insured. They'll be able to reduce deductibles if you've invested in the right security investments, the programs, the policies, not just the tools. Did you buy antivirus, but what are your processes for vetting new employees to avoid the insider threat? There's going to be a lot of new requirements on those companies wishing to qualify for insurance, let alone ways that they can keep their policies down. Just like a non-smoker gets a better rate than a smoker for life insurance, those who've invested in security will pay lower rates for the quality insurance.
Now, it's been a while since a major hack attack has been on the front page or a lead story on TV. Are you optimistic that going into 2016, certainly we haven't seen the end of them, but where would the next big attack happen? We've already talked about elections and asking for money and stealing money. Are you predicting where we might see something happen next? Retail, that's always a possibility. Government?
Well, we're continuing to see a lot of vulnerabilities and attacks focused on the medical areas, where a lot of information exists beyond just a credit card, beyond just your identity. Your entire identity is often tracked by your medical professionals. So the richness of the data is where they're going to go.
And defraud healthcare companies. I mean, it's all about the money, isn't it?
Defrauding the healthcare directly to make the cash, to gather the identity information. The richer the identity information, the more money they make. You can go out online and buy a credit card for $1.50. If I want to buy the entire identity of a person, that's going to cost me more. So they're going to go where the money is, just like the bank robbers.
Very enlightening. Bob Hansmann, Director Product Security for Raytheon Websense. Thanks, Bob.
Thank you.
We'll turn from security to management straight ahead on Government Matters.
How we think about the military, how we think about veterans, how we think about first responders. I see it in my own kids who are certainly not.
Looking back on 50 years of federal times, Jill Aitoro joins me next. In Management Matters, 50 years of change for the federal government. This month, Federal Times is honoring their own 50-year anniversary and looking back and rolling out a top 10 list of events that shaped government. Joining me with more is Jill Aitoro, editor of Federal Times. Jill, let's set this up. You finished publishing that list on Friday. Each event is accompanied by an article and a video.
Yeah.
How did you condense 50 years of history into 10 moments?
A lot happened in 50 years, Morris. Not easy. First of all, I have to credit an amazing advisory board. We had a dozen former feds that were former DOD, former civilian, that really took the lead in determining what rose to the top. But there were two main criteria that we looked at. One was these had to be historic events that impacted how government operates. So most everybody will recognize these events, and they were important to the U.S. generally speaking. But the importance couldn't just be how they impacted politics or even federal law or America at large. It had to impact government operations, how government is structured, how government is managed. The second criteria was there had to be some trickle-down effect. It couldn't just be important in a moment in time. It had to have subsequent impact for the years and decades after. It's worth noting, for example, we consider the OPM hack on the broader list, but it did not make the final 10 because we don't know yet what the impact will be in the long term. We don't know whether systems will be hacked in government and so forth. So given that fact, it didn't quite rise to the top in terms of the 10. So those were mainly what we looked at in terms of deciding.
All right, let's get right to the fun stuff, the moments themselves.
There is a moment of hope. We watch what's happening in the world of e-commerce, and we want some of that in the government. We have a number of initiatives to create e-business and e-government and e-government administrators. We also sort of follow the path of industry, that there's a lot of hope that leads to a lot of hype and then leads to internet bubbles, market valuations that we can't possibly imagine how they existed before, these market capitalizations of companies that don't actually produce things.
All right, that was Dave Wenegren of the Professional Services Council talking about the invention of the World Wide Web. Tell us more.
Yeah, it's worth noting that our 10 list was not ranked, but we did a reader survey, and they did pick invention of World Wide Web as the #1 event in terms of impact on government. But yeah, that made the list because, you know, like its impact on the world, it transformed how government processes function, how government exchanges information. It made it more efficient, but it also changed how government interacts with the citizen in terms of suddenly citizens had different expectations in terms of what they could access, the information they could get their hands on. So that really forced government to transform their messaging, to think really hard about how they share, what they share. And then, of course, I mean, it goes without saying that really the invention of the World Wide Web led to so much else. It really, you could look to the World Wide Web and the internet for cloud computing, for mobility, for even cybersecurity in terms of now having to be concerned about how you share information and who can access it.
Well, even before that, look how it infected the Postal Service.
Oh, yes. I mean, there's some. We talked about the OPM hack. I mean, really, that all tracks back to the internet and networks and, you know, people's ability to access information from all sources, including the federal government. So that was a key one. That almost seemed like a no-brainer.
There's less faxing. You don't don't send a fax, you send a PDF file. So
yeah,
it's just a lot of ripple effects. All right, here's another excerpt from your series. It features Deloitte's Beth McGrath talking about Hurricane Katrina.
There were many people who historically had kept an eye on, I'll just say the weather and what the impact is nationwide, but when you have something as impactful as, 135-mile-an-hour winds, multi-state potential impact, it was really something that I think many people didn't take seriously at the beginning, and then frankly wish they had.
All right, Jill, how did Hurricane Katrina impact how government operates?
I remember when Hurricane Katrina happened, and I remember being so frustrated in terms of seeing all of those people in such dire straits not able to get help. And what it really showcased was the lack of communication and collaboration between federal government and state and local jurisdictions. They just had not faced this sort of event before that truly tested how they interact. So that was why. I think subsequently, communication collaboration has greatly improved between governments.
So before you go, put all of this whole project into context for us. Why is it important?
There's so much, these are historic events that captured America's attention, but it also, along with the world, transforms the way government manages itself. And you hope that these are lessons learned in some cases that allow them to progress in the right direction. And generally speaking, the good and the bad of these events have allowed government to progress, to be more efficient in terms of how they manage themselves and their resources. So that's why we did the list, and it's fascinating. I encourage everybody to take a look.
Yeah, you did a great job. I enjoyed it.
Thanks.
Jill Aitoro, editor of Federal Times. See you next time, Jill. Thanks.
Thank you.
We'll turn from management to final matters straight ahead. There's a new petition on We the People, a website that serves as a direct line to the White House. Filed last month that asks President Obama to give federal employees Christmas Eve off as a paid holiday. So far, the petition only has 10% of the signatures it needs to merit an official response. But as government executive reports, there's reason for hope. Mr. Obama gave feds extra time off around Christmas in 2009, 2012, and 2014. And that's the latest from Washington. Thanks for being with us. I'm Morris Jones. We know your week is filled with other matters. Save this half hour for us.